When he publicly called me useless, I didn't respond. I just handed him a black folder. He didn't even open it. I never liked the spotlight. It's not that I lacked a voice. It's just that silence has always been my greatest asset in this career. Silence allowed me to listen, count, analyze, remember. For 9 years, I was the Chief Financial Officer of Airstun Dynamics. And for those same 9 years, I saw more than anyone should have seen within the walls of a company that looked like a public success story. I wasn't there for glamorous presentations or glitzy conference panels. I was the one who plugged the holes, counted the accidental duplicate contracts, and covered for management when the numbers didn't add up, but needed to. And then, James Smith walked in. He shone. He spoke loudly, laughed loudly, wore expensive watches, and was quoted in magazines even I had never read. One glance at me, and his verdict was set. Old school, conservative, unnecessary. I could have left, so many times, but I stayed. And now I know why. Not for the company, not for him, but for myself, for the truth. The one no one asked for, but that I held in my hands. His words during that big, shiny presentation? At Airstun, we finally got rid of the old rudiments. No more unnecessary control. We are speed. We are risk. We are the future. The cameras clicked. The investors applauded. And I stepped out of the shadows. Calmly, without even looking him in the eye. I handed him what I'd been holding for 9 years, a black folder. The one that would make every single person in that room forget about their ovation by the next morning. He smiled as I walked away, but I knew, as soon as he opened that folder, that smile would vanish. Forever. I wasn't always like this. I used to believe that justice was a process. But this story, it's not about faith. It's about what happens when the process betrays you. And you learn to be its shadow. I didn't immediately understand when exactly the company stopped being a place of work and turned into an arena. But I know this, it definitely didn't start with James. He just walked in when it was already too late to stop anything. When I first joined Airstun, we were still crammed into a stuffy office with peeling plaster on the walls and coffee that tasted like boiled batteries. The company was surviving on grants and dreams too big to fit in a PowerPoint. We were building drones for medical transport. I still remember it. Our CTO, Martin, broke down in tears when our very first prototype made it to a hospital in Riverside County with only 2% battery left. That moment? It wasn't just numbers. It was life. But 3 years later, after a whirlwind of funding rounds and 2 strategic partnerships, the romance was gone. The moment the first so-called growth advisor walked through our doors, everything changed. No more medical solutions, only military contracts, no more mission, only growth. Martin? They eased him out quietly. Burnout, they said. And that's when I started keeping notes. I wasn't an idealist, but I saw it, the rot, from the inside, and I couldn't not record it. Copies of letters, screenshots, side-by-side versions of documents, each with a different date. Every time something was corrected in hindsight, I kept the original. Not as a plan, as a habit. And through it all, I stayed silent. Year after year, no committees, no awards at corporate parties, just me, my spreadsheets, my notebooks, and a sharp ear for the things they thought I wasn't hearing. And then he appeared. James Smith, the youngest CEO in the industry, just 37, Hollywood jawline, Steve Jobs philosophy, and that I don't need to listen charisma that made half the office spill coffee on their laptops. He came in like lightning, media headlines, PowerPoints with more graphics than substance, And me? I was invisible. During our very first meeting, he didn't even say my name, just tossed a line over his shoulder. "She's the one who does the numbers, right?" And walked off. Didn't even wait for a response. I didn't say a word. Didn't correct him. He thought I was a shadow. And that was his first fatal mistake. Because when the first major contract, $14 million, came up for simplified approval, I noticed something. The contract number already existed in the system. But back then, it was for $6 million, no bonuses, no markups, no Panamanian shell company magically listed as a partner. I said nothing, just saved both documents. Because when you stay quiet long enough, the moment will come when the voice of your silence becomes the loudest sound in the room. What does a woman do when she knows the truth is on her side, but all around her is silence, and every move could destroy her? She waits, until the moment when she can no longer wait. I always knew that no one would save me, but I hoped that at least someone would notice how everything was falling apart. No one noticed. No one wanted to. James ran Airstun like a glossy startup straight off the cover of Forbes. But it was all a facade. PowerPoint decks with phrases like synergy of ideas and capital, investor brunches with champagne at 10 a.m. fake ethical manifestos written by the PR department. But the essence never changed. Squeeze money from a world that believed in technology, and squeeze it hard. Inside the company, a new policy appeared, delegation with trust, which basically meant no one was responsible for anything. When I started asking questions, I was politely reminded of the destructive energy of mistrust. I remember that meeting. James smiled, like a game show host. He said, "Isabella, we don't teach people to swim by throwing them life buoys." It sounded so philosophical that someone actually applauded. I said nothing, just opened my notebook and wrote down the date. Then, it got worse. A $48 million contract with the military department. One of the subcontractors wasn't even registered in any jurisdiction. I couldn't figure out how until I looked at the list of shareholders. One name, familiar. It was the former director of operations, fired 3 years ago, supposedly for personal reasons. That's when I started to fear. I changed my passwords, stopped leaving documents on my work computer. I kept everything offline. Printouts, flash drives, screenshots of strange transactions. I kept it all, in an archive box at home, locked with an old rusty padlock. I didn't trust the cloud, didn't trust the network, didn't even trust my own laptop anymore. There's one episode I will never forget. It was late evening. I was getting ready to leave when I accidentally heard James on a phone call in the conference room. He didn't know I was still there. His voice, completely different, sharp, commanding. "Is she still there? I thought we'd already gotten rid of her. No, she doesn't know anything. She's not that smart. It's just a habit." I froze. Just 1 minute before, I had sent him an email with questions about that exact contract. The one he was trying to hide, and only he could have seen it in the system. I stood in the dark, not breathing. And then, something clicked inside me. He didn't see me as a threat, just old, ignorable background noise. He didn't understand. Silence is not weakness. It's a strategy. From that evening on, I stopped being afraid of him, and I started waiting. And the moment came sooner than I thought. The day they accidentally forgot to invite me to a key presentation for the investors. I arrived at the office at 7:45 a.m. as usual. drank my coffee, reviewed the financial report, noticed a discrepancy in the expenses for strategic consulting. Just a typical morning. But the weekly board meeting? The room was empty. No letters, no invitations. Even James's assistant, the one who always sends those annoying extra reminders, said nothing. I approached her. "Is there a meeting today?" She pretended not to hear me, then looked up, smiled. Awkwardly. "I think it's a small meeting today." A small format, without the CFO. That's when I realized I had already been fired. They just hadn't told me yet. That same day, my access to the internal system stopped working. First to projects, then the server, then my email. I sent a letter asking for clarification on my account status. I got one sentence in reply. "Your role is being reviewed due to changes in the structure." That evening, I opened LinkedIn. And there it was. Airstun's glossy post about a new era of transparency and flexible management. There was a photo, a presentation. James, standing proud in the middle of the room surrounded by investors. And the caption? "We are leaving archaic processes and unnecessary functions in the past, and paving the way for speed, trust, and freedom." No mention of my name, no thanks, no tribute. I wasn't on the list. I wasn't even in the story. I sat in the darkness of my office, for the last time. Around me, bare walls, a few boxes, and one flash drive that I'd been carrying on my keys for 2 years. That flash drive? It had everything. Copies of backdated contracts, reports with fictitious expenses, lists of shell companies, payments to consultants who didn't even exist, internal letters openly discussing how to circumvent the audit. It wasn't just dirt. It was a map. Of all the shady deals, done in the name of innovation. And that night, I decided I won't disappear quietly. If they made me invisible, I'll make them look. I was no longer a victim. I was a quiet response to a loud lie. And the next morning, when James triumphantly opened the main investor presentation of the year, I walked into the hall, unnoticed, no badge, but with the same black folder in my hands. He was sure I wouldn't come. And that is exactly why I did. The conference room was packed. Investors, partners, press, all the same faces that ignored the facts as long as the picture looked good. I stood behind the glass door, watching James smile and strut across the stage. The slides clicked by, one after another. Growth charts, profit lines, colored circles, and a sea of empty words. I wasn't in a hurry. I waited. For the exact phrase that started all the lies. Today, we are opening a new chapter. Without the burdens of the past, without unnecessary controls, we are pure speed. That was my cue. I opened the door, quietly, no drama. No one noticed, not at first. I didn't have a badge. But then, one of the lawyers turned around. Then an assistant. Eyes, wide open. James kept talking, until he saw me. A pause. Just a second. But it was enough. His face froze in a smile. I walked toward him, slowly, holding a black folder in my hands. "This is for you, James. Maybe you'll make it before the break." I said it so quietly only he and I could hear. He didn't take it, just stared. The smile faded. He looked around. No one understood what was happening. Until I placed the folder right on the table, in front of the first row. And I left. No reaction, no turning back, no eye contact. I knew what was in that folder, and I knew it was enough to stop the charade. From the taxi window, I saw the movement start in the hall. Someone approached the table, opened the folder, picked up the documents. And in an instant, the smiles disappeared. James said no more. That evening, the company's website temporarily suspended operations. The next day, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. I didn't answer. Not once. The only thing I did? I sent an electronic copy of the folder to the SEC and another to the press. He left me nameless, and I left him without cover. But that was just the first wave. A storm was coming, and I knew exactly who it would wash away first. The silence that followed was deafening. But it was no longer my silence. It was theirs. The first few hours after the presentation were strange. No statements, no calls, no outrage, just silence. A few messages from former colleagues, no text, just videos, no voiceovers, no explanations. In one of them, an investor picks up the black folder, reads the first few pages, and quietly says something to the man next to him. Then someone else leans in. Faces change. James is still talking, but not everyone is listening anymore. People begin to stand, quietly, leaving the room one by one. No words, no drama, just understanding. The first few hours were empty. No sounds, no reactions, no calls I was waiting for. Only the ones I was afraid of. Private numbers, silent videos, fragments, glances, whispers, discomfort. Everyone avoided my name. The press wrote, "Anonymous source, independent investigation, internal leak." They didn't dare to name me, and maybe they were right. The first official letter came 48 hours later, an email from Airstun's legal department, asking me to clarify the source of the documents that had illegally entered the public domain. I didn't respond. Then came the threats. Another letter, this time from the lawyers. Unfair disclosure of commercial secrets. Irreparable damage to the company. My reply? More silence. And that's when I finally understood just how lonely this war really was. Not a single line from anyone in the company. No. You did the right thing. No. I'm proud of you. Just averted glances in the supermarket aisles from people who used to sit 2 desks away. And then, the anonymous calls began. At first, just silence. Then, breathing. On the other end, then came the voices. Do you think anyone will protect you? This won't end just like that. I stayed calm, on the outside. But that night, I woke up at 3 a.m. and stood in the kitchen, barefoot, holding a knife in my hand. Not to fight, not to defend, just to hold something. It wasn't a hero moment. It wasn't strength. It was emptiness and clarity. Because I knew I had done the right thing. But doing the right thing doesn't always bring relief, and it certainly doesn't bring allies. The truth? It's a sharp thing, but when you hold it for too long, it starts to cut you. But what I didn't know was that the next blow wouldn't come from the company. It would come from the people I thought were on my side. No one hit me harder than those I once believed were on my side. A few days later, when the story was already in the news, I got a message from my brother. Can we talk? We weren't close, never had been. He's a father of 3, man with a clean reputation, head of a department at a large insurance company. He lived his whole life cautiously, carefully, without ripples. He didn't understand my choice, never had. And now, it seemed, he needed to say it out loud. We met at a cafe near his office. I arrived 10 minutes early, out of habit. He was 15 minutes late, also out of habit. He sat down without ordering, looked me in the eye, and began. You know, I understand that you had your reasons, but do you understand how it looks from the outside? How? I didn't mean to be ironic, but it came out anyway. Like personal revenge. You could have left gracefully, but you decided to drag everyone down with you. That's not the way. It's self-immolation. I didn't need to hear more. I knew that tone, disappointment dressed up as concern. I heard it from my father when I chose not to work in the public sector, from my ex when I wouldn't step aside for his promotion, and now, again. You know I covered for this company for 9 years, right? I asked. That was your choice, like everything else. People don't like being forced to see what they're not ready for, and you forced them. Now they fear you. They don't respect you. Do you understand? I was silent. Because yes, I did understand. Everyone says that truth earns you respect, but no one warns you that along the way, you lose everyone who's not ready to hear it. That evening, my mother called. Same tone, same intro. Couldn't you have thought a little before doing something like that? No anger, just fatigue. She said an acquaintance had stopped her in the store. So that's your daughter in the news? And my father? He hadn't said a word, just walked room to room, not reading, not commenting, just moving. You've worked your whole life, she said, and now all of that has been reduced to one scandal. You could have kept quiet, at least for yourself, at least for us. I listened, but I didn't apologize. Because if I had stayed quiet again, that would have been the real betrayal. I didn't become an outcast. They just chose to remain in a world I could no longer call my own. I was lonely, not just in my profession, but in everything. But then, from the silence, from the shadows, came voices I never expected to stand by my side. I was prepared for silence, prepared for threats, even for a lawsuit. But I wasn't prepared for someone to say, I saw it too. 1 week after the scandal, when the case had already started to attract official attention, I got a message from Amy. We'd only worked together for a few months, 6 years ago. Accounting department. She left after a reorganization, though back then it looked like a voluntary move. We hadn't spoken since. Her message said, I saw the news. I know it's true. I saw how the payments were falsified, but I was young and afraid back then. If you ever want, I'm ready to testify. I read it 5 times, back to back. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something like warmth. A few days later, another message, this one from a former company lawyer. She used to review old project contracts. Her tone was calm. No drama, no emotion, just the truth. I still have the original contract with Altix, the one we signed before they rewrote it. My copy doesn't contain the clauses or the amounts they later published. They just rewrote it to justify millions in spending. If necessary, I can provide it. Then came a letter from a university. I once gave a lecture there on financial ethics. A student wrote, I don't know if you'll read this, but what you did is the most honest thing we've seen. We're taught to be right. You showed us what it looks like when it hurts, and it's real. I didn't cry, but I read every word with the same focus I once gave to balance sheets. There were no chants, no banners, just cautious trust. I saw it, I believe it, I was there too. Amid the threats, the anonymous calls, the silence. These few voices, they didn't shout, they whispered, but I heard them. They didn't become heroes to me. didn't show up with shields, didn't pull me out of the darkness. They just appeared when I was no longer expecting anyone. They reminded me that I wasn't the only one who saw how it all began. I started walking the streets with my face uncovered again. Not for defiance, not for bravado, but because I had one more thing left to do. To close the circle. Forever. I didn't expect him to fall so quietly. But maybe that's how they fall. The ones who stood for years not on their own feet, but on the fear of others. The investigation started with a few dry inquiries. Then came the first summonses. The company? Silent. James? Gone. Vanished from the public eye. Even his LinkedIn profile. Temporarily deactivated. But I received screenshots. Equipment being removed from the office. HR sending mass emails about restructuring. One by one, the heads rolled. Quietly. No press releases. Then, a statement from the SEC. An internal investigation is underway into manipulation of reporting, concealment of beneficiaries, falsification of contract terms, and use of fictitious structures. Word for word, from the black folder. I didn't go on TV, didn't write any posts, didn't tweet. I just watched. And then, a journalist called, the same one who once called James a visionary. Now, he wanted a comment on the loss of confidence in the company's leadership. I said just one thing. You called him a visionary. You just didn't specify what kind of future he was leading everyone into. I was quoted again, but this time as an analyst who warned about systemic risks in corporate governance. They gave back the respect they'd taken with the same hands that once applauded him. Then a message from the SEC. Part of the investigation was now criminal. James was facing charges: fraud, abuse of authority, obstruction of justice. Some of his advisors had already made deals. But I wasn't happy. I didn't believe in karma. This wasn't retribution, it was inevitability. If you spend years rewriting reality for a presentation, one day someone will just open the file with the raw numbers. To me, it was a financial report, an indicator, a column, a date, a fact. He wasn't broken. He built himself to be broken. I just pulled back the curtain. And then a letter arrived. Inside it, an invitation I never expected to see. And it changed everything. I thought that after all this, there would be nothing, just emptiness. But instead, a letter arrived. A short message sent to an email I'd long since stopped checking every day. The sender? The Center for Corporate Ethics at Hastings University. The subject line read, "Invitation to participate in an educational program." At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then, a mass mailing. But the body of the message said, "We would like to invite you to attend an open lecture on personal responsibility in the corporate environment. Your story is not just a case study. It is an example of how one person's silence can be a crime and their voice an act of restoring balance. We are not asking for a loud speech. We are asking for your presence." I read it several times, then again. I wasn't sure I wanted to talk about it again, but maybe, this time, it wasn't about me. I said yes. And on the day of the event, I stood backstage in an auditorium I'd never been in before. Students, teachers, a few journalists, no cameras, no PR, just people who wanted to listen. I didn't go into details. I didn't criticize, didn't moralize. I talked about choice, about the moment when silence stops being neutral, about fear, how it becomes part of the daily dress code, and how, in a world where everyone's used to not seeing, Sometimes one person has to raise their head. After the lecture, a girl approached me, a student. She said, "In my family, my dad works for a company where something similar is happening. I don't know if he'll ever be able to do what you did, but now I know that it's possible." That was the most important thing. I didn't want recognition. I didn't believe in victory. But if even one person knows that truth exists not just in theory, then it was worth it. Justice isn't when evil is punished. It's when someone who sees it is no longer afraid to speak. Sometimes, for everything to change, it's enough for one person not to be afraid to be needed in the very place they were once called superfluous.